A lot of property owners wonder, how much should my property really rent for? Whether you own a single family home or a small apartment building, it's a common question. What's the market rent for the rental unit or rental units that I own? And the answer, unfortunately, not straightforward. I'm going to discuss factors that go into the market rent for a given property or a given unit here in the Columbus area. And this advice is probably general. It's going to make sense wherever you're located. So as we think about market rent, there's really, I think, five main factors that can affect how much you could charge for rent. And let me just list them all, and then I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. Number one, location. Number two, condition. Number three, competition. Number four, seasonality. And number five, tenant screening. So back to number one, location. Pretty obvious. The better location your property's in, the more you're going to be able to charge for rent. That's the old adage in real estate: location, location, location. And it goes just as much for rentals as it does for other types of real estate. So if you're in a good school district or in kind of a hot downtown area, you're going to be able to charge a premium. If you're in kind of a less desirable area or bad schools, you're not going to be able to charge as much. And something to think about with this is you got to be careful that you don't over improve your property for a given location, because if most of the two bedroom apartments around you are renting for 800, but you make your apartment super, super nice and think you're going to be able to charge 1,000, unfortunately, someone who can afford $1,000 in rent is probably more likely going to go to a location and rent an average apartment for $1,000, more so than get the nicest apartment in kind of a bad area, if that makes sense. So careful with that. Number two, condition. So we kind of just touched on this. In general, of course, the nicer the condition of the property, the more you can charge in rent. Makes sense. So if, and this goes for both the exterior of the property, how well maintained is it, how nice does it look, and then the inside of the property, how up to date are the finishes, right? So property owners, it's easy, and this has happened to me. You buy a property, you fix it up, and you start renting it out, and before you know it, it's been 7 or 8 years since you bought that property, and the finishes are starting to become out of date. And so even though in your mind it's kind of like brand new because you just renovated it, to a tenant here in the year 2021 or 2022, they're seeing a fairly dated look, plus it's had some wear and tear over the years. So be aware of that. Number three, competition. So the market is actually what sets the rent given unit, not the landlord. So you need to be aware that you're not operating in a vacuum, and a prospective tenant is comparing and contrasting the value that's on offer with your apartment relative to the rent you're charging against every other rental unit in the city. Okay, so if there's a bunch of other apartments or homes for rent around you, that's going to set kind of a cap on how much you'll be able to charge in rent. If there's not a lot for rent in the area where you are, that could be a good thing because there's not a lot of competition. It could also be a bad thing because it may mean there's not a lot of demand for rentals in that area. Something to bear in mind is when you look on Craigslist or Zillow and you see a bunch of homes or apartments for rent, you see the prices there. Those are all the prices at which homes and apartments did not rent. Okay, so what you're seeing there is kind of like the sticker price. Like if you go to a dealership, you're not actually seeing where properties are actually renting. You're seeing a bunch of unrented apartments. So kind of a critical distinction there. Number four, seasonality. So as I record this, we are in early November, and the weather's starting to get cold, rainy, snow in the forecast. So between November and January, it's very slow rental market here in Central Ohio. In other parts of the country, depending on their weather or depending if they run on like a school schedule, you may have seasonal effects in other areas as well. So the upshot is homes and apartments we have listed for rent right now, we're not able to get as much for those as we could if it was May or June, right? Those are the hot times of the year when people are looking to move and there's a lot of activity and it's much easier to lease up homes and apartments. And then the last thing I'll mention here is tenant screening. Kind of paradoxically, the more strict you are with tenant screening, the lower the rent, the asking rent that you're going to be able to charge needs to be. So if you're doing very minimal tenant screening, you're maybe just giving them a handshake and a look in the eye, and you're not doing any type of criminal or credit history or anything like that, you can usually charge a premium in rent, because folks who have a troubled history are happy to pay a little bit more just for the ability to live somewhere, because they know that a lot of landlords won't accept or won't approve them to sign a lease. On the other hand, if you want to be pretty strict with screening, you want to set a high minimum, or you're looking for someone with no trouble, with evictions or criminal history, those folks, they're kind of more like you and I in that they're looking for a deal. They have a solid financial situation and a solid rental history. They know that they're going to be taking their time and kind of looking for more of a deal. So to attract those types of tenants, you're going to need to lower your asking rent. Sometimes people get this idea like, oh, I'll set the rent high and then I'll only get really well qualified applicants. It's actually the exact opposite of that. So hope all that's helpful as you try and sort through the asking rent for your property or for a property you're thinking about buying. If you ever have a question about the market rent or the asking rent for a given property, we're happy to help. You can shoot us an email here at RL Property Management, and we're usually able to get you a market rent analysis that'll give you some more detail on a specific number for your property. Thanks.